Hi, hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Naya, and today I'm going to tell you guys about the 8 books that I read in the month of July. Love Island ended earlier this month, so hopefully I can whip myself back into shape and actually start reading more. I know 8 books is still a lot. Eight books is a lot of books, okay? That's more than I think most people read, on average, whatever. But it doesn't feel like a lot for me, especially because so many of the books this month, I think I really relied on audiobooks. And I love a physical copy. I love consuming books via audiobook. It saves time, it saves energy. It's so convenient when I'm busy, but I just miss being able to sit down with a book in hand. That being said, I started the month of July by finishing The Great Displacement, Climate Change, and the Next Great American Migration by Jake Biddle. I am somewhere between 4.5 to 4.75 stars regarding this book. I think it was really informative and also the kind of nonfiction that kind of made me want to vom out of dread and despair and horror, because it was a very harrowing read. This book is basically about how climate change as a whole is impacting lives in America, specifically kind of how people live, the areas that people live, and the housing crises that come from climate change. Some of the things that this book covers are things like areas that are prone to flooding and the flood insurance that comes with that. You have areas in California that have been decimated by fires and people leaving those areas and not coming back after their homes have been destroyed, and really just the cascading effect that greater climate change has on how we live our lives here in America. One chapter that was particularly difficult was the chapter on the Colorado River and different groups and communities' access to the water there, and all of the financial, bureaucratic, governmental factors that play into kind of how Americans react to climate crisis, and how certain areas of the US are almost viewed as these protected safe havens from really extreme climate disaster, and how that migration is shaping the demographic in those cities. It's a very interesting read, but a very kind of distressing one, because you get to really see kind of the real life implications that this big scary word of climate change has on real life. I feel like it's very easy to kind of mentally separate the impact of climate change because it feels so far away. It feels so not impacting you, but in reality, there is a trickle-down effect that is touching the entire country, that's touching the entire world, obviously, but this book does focus on the greater United States. Highly recommended, especially now. I think so much of the US is experiencing a significant heat wave. Climate change. I'm not gonna lie, guys, it's so hot and filming this is kind of miserable. Even though I love what I'm talking about, I am so sweaty and uncomfortable. The next book that I finished was Yes Chef by Grace Riley, and I gave this book 5 stars. Guys, this was so good. I read this book with my friend Tyla, and it was so fun reading it with someone and getting to react to the cute moments, the spicy moments. I highly recommend reading romance books with your friends. But in this book we follow Poppy, who is in a family that is kind of in the restaurant business, but Poppy herself is an influencer, and Jack, who is the chef that used to work for her family's business but is now kind of off on his own trying to start a restaurant left to him by his late mentor. Now the thing is that Poppy's family does not really take her seriously, so she kind of worms her way into Jack's life and basically says, hey, let me help you make this restaurant a success. I understand marketing, I understand social media, you don't get those things, you can do the cooking, let me help the other side. And that is basically the setup for their romance. So they kind of have this working relationship budding into a friendship that obviously trickles into a romance, and it is such a good book. From a characterization perspective, I really wasn't sure how I was going to feel about Poppy and Jack at first too, but I think for Jack specifically, he is grumpy in the way that he's not an asshole. It definitely is a Grumpy Sunshine book, but I feel like pretty early on in the book, the two of them come to an understanding about each other. Something about this is that they both have ADHD, and they both find that out about each other, and they're both kind of able to understand how the other person moves a lot more, and they give each other grace in that. And I think that was so lovely. They treated each other with so much grace and empathy, and they really took the time to understand each other and understand how their ADHD presented differently in each one of them. But at the same time, they both were helping each other to push themselves out of their comfort zones in a way that was just so romantic. I also really like how we got to see so much of the whole restaurant building portion of it. Something that I read earlier this year was In Your Dreams by Sarah Adams, and in that book they were also starting a restaurant, but I feel like we skipped over a lot of the parts of them developing this restaurant, which was the whole shtick of that book too. But in Yes Chef, they really built out the process of it. You get to hear a lot about the food and the cooking, and that was really enjoyable. But yeah, all in all, both characters had a really great story arc. They were very fully fleshed out. Their emotional growth was great. The side characters were fun. The setting was fun. There was a cute cat. what more could you ask for? The next book I finished was No Matter What by Cara Bastone, which I gave 4.75 stars. This is the only book in the month of July that I actually have a copy of. I read this with two of my besties, Kai and Isabel, and this book was very, very sweet. I will say I feel like this book will be for a particular type of person, and it's not going to be for everybody. In this book, you follow Roz and Vin, who have been married for a few years, and Roz's best friend is Vin's younger brother. At the beginning of this book, Roz and Vin are about a year out from a very traumatic accident that also involved the friend/brother Rafi. The accident has basically caused a rift and tension and just strain on their marriage. So primary trope of this book is marriage in peril, which I feel like is not for everybody, but I really enjoyed it. And I will say, this book is like miscommunication final boss. If you hate miscommunication, which I thought I did, you might hate this, but it worked for me. A lot of the strain that happens between the two of them is because they are making assumptions about what the other person is feeling and thinking, and to a lot of people that can be like really bang your head in a wall. That's so frustrating. Just communicate. But for me, I understood, because this is coming from a place of also being in a long-term relationship, like over 4 years. You get to a point when you're in a long-term relationship with someone where sometimes you just assume how they're thinking, because you get to know a person so well that you do pick up on their cues, you do pick up on how they process and how they think. And it's not preposterous to make assumptions about how your significant other is feeling. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't communicate with your significant other, right? But I get how after so many years of being married, Roz and Vin assumed that they understood the other person's intent without clarifying, without wanting to kind of poke the bear more. I think this book very well captured the nuances of love and the messiness that comes with truly loving someone and really just acting out of pure love and adoration and thinking that you're doing what's best for the other person, even if it's at the expense of your own well-being and your own happiness. Is it kind of infuriating at times? Yes, I understand that. This will not be for everyone. It certainly was for me. I'm defending it. I loved it. I cried really hard at the end of this. I also think how this book dealt with kind of the healing past trauma and discussing PTSD was also very well done. So overall, loved this one. The next book I finished was Men Who Hate Women by Lauren Bates, which I gave 4.75 stars. And this is another book that truly filled me with so much dread reading it, but I think it is a very, very important read. I want all of my girlfriends to read this, and I also want to implore all of the women that I know to have the men in their lives read this book. This book is basically a deep dive into incel culture and into extreme misogyny, especially in online spaces. Our author Lauren Bates actually goes undercover and talks about that during a portion of her book. She goes undercover as a younger man who is kind of entering these online forums where these incels and these extreme misogynists kind of discuss and talk. The book is broken up into a couple of chapters of different kind of like spheres of the manosphere. So the incel community, pickup artists, men going their own way, men's rights activists, online trolls and harassment, physical and sexual abuse, financial and emotional exploitation, men who are afraid of women, infiltration in the mainstream, and also like pushback and solutions at the end, which I really enjoyed. I always like a nonfiction book that is informative of an issue but also gives potential solutions. Anyways, I think what was so terrifying about this book is Lauren made a really good point that we often don't take online incel culture that seriously. I think obviously like most women are very aware of the dangers that there are in the world of, you know, being cautious of strangers and of men and just all of these things that kind of come with being a woman. But I feel like often incel culture and the idea of this online manosphere is really often the butt of a joke and not taken very seriously. And Lauren makes a point in this book that that perspective is dangerous, and she really dives into how this online misogynistic sphere is really like expanding its grasp amongst young men, amongst our government, and how it truly is everywhere, and that there are some very deeply concerning beliefs and thoughts and views that men have, and that when they get into these circles where they're just perpetuating the same ideas and they're feeding into each other, it just snowballs into this very large, dangerous effect. Next, I read Chasing the Fire by Paisley Hope, which was the 5th and final book in the Silver Pine series. I am so sad to be out of this little world. I loved this series so much. I gave this book 4.5 stars, and in this book you follow Olivia and Asher. Olivia and Asher are pretty significant characters throughout the rest of the series. Obviously, it's all interconnected standalones, but Olivia is one of the girls in like the main bestie girl group in the series, and Asher has also been around the entire series as a side character, brother working at the local bar, and also he's the local fire chief. The whole shtick with this book is that it's accidental pregnancy, and it's very much the type of accidental pregnancy thing where she's like, hey, I know my options, I'm gonna keep it, you don't have to be involved. And suddenly this man who never has wanted to let anyone into his life is falling at her feet. Maybe accidental pregnancy ain't all that bad, guys, okay? Maybe sometimes it's fun. This was not my favorite in the Silver Pine series, but my general feeling towards the series is that I love it. I think all of these books were such a hoot. I will say a bit of Asher's backstory into what makes him so broody and mysterious and closed off to love felt a little like underdeveloped in the sense that it was kind of intense, and I feel like it kind of smoothed over really quickly at the end. Like the resolution to that was really quick at the end, but overall this was a fun time. I feel like I've said this before about the series, it is a fun, spicy, contemporary cowboy series, but with a lot more emotional depth than you might expect going into it. I missed the series already, and I'm desperately searching for another summery cowboy romance, so please, if you have suggestions, I am open. Next, I finally read On Arthur Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I gave this book 4 stars. This was so beautiful. I did an immersive read of this, and Ocean Vuong himself is the one who narrates the book, so you get to hear his lyricism and his poetry and his beautiful writing through his own voice, and I think that really elevated the experience for me. This book had some really beautiful themes and quotes regarding identity, sexuality, the immigrant experience, complicated relationships with family, all written in this beautiful letter to his mother who will never be able to read it. Ocean Vuong is 100% an incredible writer in regards to his prose, but where this book fell flat for me was the narrative structure. The non-linear storytelling really took me out of it at times, and the order in which the story was told a bit just kind of the flow didn't work for me. I can take a step back and appreciate the creative decision that came with how this story was structured, but I just think for my own personal enjoyment of it, it wasn't for me. I think the beauty of the writing was enough to save my enjoyment from the structural choices with the plot. Next, I read The Very Definition of Love by Sophia Benoit. I gave this book 5 stars. I think this is probably my favorite book that I read in the month of July. I think it was so good, guys. I'm like thinking about it. I was giggling, I was kicking my feet. I literally could barely read the next day because I was just thinking about how good the book was. I stayed up until 2 a.m. on a work night because I could not put down that book. This book is described as Bridgerton meets Emily Henry, and honestly, I feel like the vibe is there. In this book, you follow Harriet, who is more of a wallflower. She's had a couple of unsuccessful seasons, and Alexander, who is the local rake. Wallflower and being out several seasons means that she's been on the marriage market for a while, but has not had success, and she kind of just likes to sit back and people watch. Whereas being a rake means, you know, he gets around town. The two of them are found in a compromising position where it is just the two of them alone, and back in those days there is a very particular kind of social etiquette in which an unmarried young lady should not be alone unchaperoned with an unmarried young man. So in a panic they basically pretend that they're engaged to save primarily her reputation and her family's reputation, because if her reputation is tainted by being seen with a man unmarried, it will impact her sisters negatively when they enter the marriage market. So you follow them on their journey to get married for the sake of their reputation, and basically agree to a friendship and agree to a marriage in name only, and their love and their relationship builds from there. And all in all, this was such a beautiful book. I think both characters were so well written. I loved the yearning and the pining. It was so delicious. I actually have never really read Regency romances before, but I think this book might propel me into that area. Something about specifically the social rules and the social structures and the expectations and the etiquette of the Regency era make all of these potential conflicts and issues in these relationships so much realer, and it makes the stakes higher, which sometimes in contemporary romance you have these conflicts that are kind of just like, what's the point? What are the stakes? Like, it's a conflict for the sake of conflict. Whereas here you have these real world, real society issues that are preventing them from being together or causing rifts or issues in their relationship. This is the first book in what I assume will eventually become a series about all of her sisters, and this book literally only just came out, which means I have to wait God knows how long for the next book, and I can't wait. Also, I will say, the love confession, I think one of the best love confessions I have read in ages. I was like, my jaw dropped. I was in awe reading that. I had to read it again because I was like, this is beautiful, this is amazing, this is incredible. I think you need to read this. This book was so good and so worth the hype. I rounded out the month of July with Matcha on Monday by Michiko Aoyama, which I gave 3.5 stars. This book is broken up into 12 chapters that follow the calendar year, and it's kind of almost like little interconnected stories that all stem from the first story, which happens in this matcha cafe. Now, my whole thing of kind of what I was expecting coming into this book was something similar to what I understand the premise of Before the Coffee Gets Cold, which I think takes place in the same cafe. I kind of figured that the matcha cafe would be this like centralized location to this book, given that it was called Matcha on Monday, which was a misunderstanding on my part. That wasn't really the case. Each chapter is kind of just its own standalone story, but they are all interconnected in some way, and it kind of full circles around. It's very sweet and literary, though I will say the prose isn't anything crazy standout, which I think for me in literary fiction, I am really looking for almost creativity, uniqueness, or just strength in the prose to keep me gripped, and I feel like this book just wasn't for me. The genre of translated Japanese literature, this very like cozy literature, isn't really for me. I think this will be for the right audience, but it wasn't my favorite. Overall, I think I had a really good month. I also got in the middle of 4 other books during kind of the tail end of July that I am carrying into August, which I talk about in my previous video, which is my August TBR picks. That's it from me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.